Bonsoir à toutes et bienvenue dans Fantasy Ballers, le podcast qui vous parle de Fantasy NFL. On est en direct ce soir le 10 août et on est avec Aptine comme d'habitude. Salut Aptine.
Salut Marc, bonjour à tous.
Et ce soir, on va exceptionnellement faire le podcast en anglais parce qu'on a un invité très spécial en la personne de Justin Boone, qu'on présente plus pour la plupart de nos auditeurs le connaissent et le remercie pour des victoires passées grâce à ses projections et ses classements très précis. Justin, good evening, good afternoon for you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Right off the top, we should say the little secret is that I do speak French. J'ai allé à l'école français de 4e à 8e année. Mes parents m'ont pris d'une école complètement en anglais et c'était pas immersion, c'était complètement français. Alors, j'étais pas très content quand ils ont fait ça. J'étais d'un des meilleurs étudiants en école anglaise et après ça, j'avais aucune idée qu'est-ce qui était arrivé dans l'école française, mais ça m'a pris un an ou 2 ans et je parlais complètement, j'étais égal à les autres étudiants et en 8e année, j'étais voté le président de l'école. So, but we did decide before the show that your English is probably better than my French because
I'm not sure
I'm
anymore.
sure I'm already getting judged. I know people always talk about France French versus Canadian French and that sort of thing. But yeah, I was saying to you, I have no idea what the terms are, the football terms. I have no clue what they would be. So I would be stopping constantly or saying them in English. So we decided that you guys speaking English would probably be the better way to go for the show. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries. To be honest, I don't think we know the French words for American football terms anyway. The Canadians are way better at us at defending the language and coming up with their own words. But yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And I was just saying, I guess you understood, but a lot of our listeners have always cited you as one of the key, especially because your rankings are free as well, which is amazing for us because a lot of the professional experts are behind subscriptions, and I guess fantasy is a bit smaller in France and it's a bit less common for us to be buying yearly subscriptions. So it's been really great to be able to follow you, and I think a lot of people are happy to listen to you tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you can thank the score for the ranking still being free. They're the ones that are making that decision, not me. I'm almost kind of surprised they're not charging for them at this point. But and it was great. I mean, I'm sure you've talked about it on your show, but even the way this came about, right? I had put out a tweet, whatever it was, 7 weeks ago, just asking people because I'd seen so many analysts popping up from around the world. I was curious, who are people's favorite analysts outside of, the US and Canada, where I feel like most of the fantasy analysts are coming from. And I got so much interaction on that tweet from all around the world, from all over Europe and Brazil and Mexico and Australia and South Africa and so many different places. And then I decided, you know what? I think we should all compete against each other in a league. So we put together a league. And initially I wanted to make it just analysts from around the world and only have maybe 1 or 2 from the US, but it was a little tough to kind of get, as many people that, wanted to be in it and all that sort of stuff. So we ended up with an American division and then an international division. And the draft was a ton of fun. The league seems like it's going to be great. Everybody in it is really cool. And even the thread on Twitter where we're all talking has been fantastic and a lot of jokes in there. So it's worked out way better than I even expected. And I'm really excited to see where this league goes now, even though, as we were talking before the show, we both kind of got a gut punch right away because I lost Cam Akers, who was my 3rd round pick, and you lost Michael Thomas for a little bit here. I think he was your 4th round pick. Yeah,
4th or 5th, I can't remember. But yeah, we lost. We started risky by taking Saquon and got a bit of. I chose Saquon. Aptine was like, no, you got to go with Alvin Kamara. It's too risky, etc. I was like, no, there's no way. I'm taking Saquon, and then we got Michael Thomas injured now, and Carson Wentz injured, and it's.
And you had taken your chances on Deshaun Watson, I think,
right?
Watson, I would have taken him. If you guys didn't take him, I was going to take him. I kind of thought I was waiting on my second quarterback, kind of thinking that he might end up being that guy. But It's tough, especially, this could happen anytime in any league. You do these drafts before the season. That's why when it's a redraft, I always tell everybody, wait until that final week before week 1, find out all the preseason injuries, find out all the players that get cut, so you have the most possible information to do your draft. But in dynasty leagues, especially startups, that's what's filling our off season. We're going to do those throughout the off season, and you're inevitably going to have injuries pop up. And I was lucky that I actually drafted Darrell Henderson in that league, so it softened the loss of Cam Akers just a little bit, but still tough to lose your 3rd round pick in a dynasty startup about a week after the draft.
Yeah, immediately. I think was the draft still going on when it happened, or was it just finished?
It might have been. We might have been like it was. You're right, because some people were grabbing on, right? Like Xavier Jones and Jake Funk got drafted right in there. Yeah. So there was a few rounds left. Yeah.
All right. Well, I know you've talked about it many times, so I'm not sure our French public has heard it, but I'm interested in the story of how you first of all got interested in fantasy football, but especially how it became a full-time thing for you. So if you can tell us a little bit how that happened.
Yeah, sure. It's funny because I grew up as a Buffalo Bills fan. I grew up in Niagara Falls, Canada. Right on the border, about a half an hour away from Buffalo. And when I was at that very impressionable age as a kid, the Bills were going to the Super Bowl and losing every year, but they were still going to the Super Bowl every year. And, so I kind of started to love football. But it wasn't until high school that I actually played football. And before that, I was playing, soccer. We call it over here, obviously, football for you guys, and hockey and all the other sports. And then once I tried football, that was it. I kind of quit playing all the other sports, and I just knew that was the sport for me. Whether I was playing it, whether I was going to be involved in it, I really wanted to be around the game. And I was lucky. I ended up going to school for journalism with kind of the mindset that I wanted to be a sports writer. And I got a job with the Hamilton Tiger Cats coming out of school, and I was the beat writer for the team. And it's the CFL. It wasn't the NFL, but it's a professional team anyway. And I got to see how a professional team works. I got to see how the players approach their job, the coaches, the training staff, and that stuff that, I didn't know this at the time because I didn't know I would be doing fantasy football down the road, but those were like really valuable lessons that even today, when we see sometimes issues with the front office or training staffs and that sort of stuff pop up, I can pull back from that information and go, yeah, I remember, well, maybe they're doing this because of this or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you learn, that some of the players take their job very seriously. And I think when you hear about, especially rookies coming out being very hard workers, I would, take notice of that, because sometimes that really means something, because there's some guys that come into the league that aren't as hard workers. And I witnessed some of that too with the team. Those are things that, you can kind of use when it comes to making some of these fantasy football decisions. But I was with them for a couple of years, and then I got a job with TSN, which is like Canadian ESPN. And they're kind of hockey first, but I went there and started running their football section and also their mixed martial arts section as well. And about, I want to say, a year or two in, I was playing fantasy football with friends. A lot of my friends weren't great fantasy football players. A lot of them still aren't great fantasy football players. But when I had gotten to the Tie Cats, a lot of the guys in the office there were very hardcore about it. So it was really, really fun. And that's when I kind of really started to sharpen my skills and really enjoy it a lot more. And so I started doing things back then, making my own rankings, making my own projections. I wasn't showing anyone. It was just for me to help me in drafts. And, I'd have my highlighter and I'd be crossing names off during the draft and all that sort of stuff. And then when I went to TSN a couple years in, I thought, maybe I could help out. We had a fantasy guy at the time, Scott Cullen, great guy. And I thought I could help him out. Maybe I could also put up my rankings and do some football work, because he was doing a lot of hockey. He was trying to do every sport. He was doing hockey and basketball, and baseball. So Scott agreed and TSN agreed to let me put my rankings up and start to write some articles. And because I was now writing for an accredited site and putting my rankings up, I came across Fantasy Pros, and I wondered, how would I do if I went up against the other analysts around the industry? And at the time I was just going into it thinking, don't embarrass yourself. Don't finish last, right? Just, I'm competitive, but let's see how it goes. And very quickly, early on, I was like up in the top 20 and then up in the top 10. And we were, halfway through the season or something. And then the competitive juices really started flowing. And I was like, okay, I can win this thing, right? Well, I can't believe this. But going into so I finished 8th the first year, going into the second season, I felt that imposter syndrome that I think we all feel when we do stuff. And, oh, the bottom's going to fall out. And, this year, there's no way. I got lucky last year, right? Beginner's luck. And then the second season, I think I came in 11th. And it just has continued from there. And the last 7 years, I finished in the top 7 each year. I won the whole thing finally in 2019. I finally got that off my back. I felt like the Bills, actually. I felt like the Bills all those years, going to the Super Bowl, not winning it every year. I was so close, and I kept, winning a trophy for being top 5 and being disappointed because I didn't win the whole thing. So it was nice to finally win it. And I had a good off season that year where I didn't have that pressure, or that anger on myself for, can't believe I came close and didn't come away with it again. But And so along the way, after TSN, I was there for 4 years or so, got a job with the Score, running their NFL section and with a team of writers under me. And that was fantastic. And I continued to do the fantasy stuff sort of over and above my job. But I knew at that point, I was pretty sure I wanted to do the fantasy thing full time. So I just kept doing it kind of on the side, after work and spare moments at work on weekends, and I have a very understanding group of friends, and my family and my wife especially are, really supportive, and they know how I am, and they know, the amount of time that I want to dedicate to this stuff, because, I want to do it well. If I'm going to do it, I don't want to just sort of partially do it. I want to make sure I'm giving it my all. So it's been great. And 3-4 years ago, the Score decided to make me full-time fantasy and just kind of set me loose.
Awesome.
And so well before the quarantine, I started working from home, and it's been fantastic. Every day when I wake up, I'm so lucky to be doing this. And I'm so lucky that, people continue to follow, and, the rankings have continued to be good. And, that in general, my content, I tell everybody, I don't want people to just look at my rankings and make their decisions. I like being a part of the process where I want to help people become better fantasy players. I want to help teach them the things I learned along the way. I want to help teach them how to kind of analyze some of this information so that, they can look at my rankings as a guide. They can listen to podcasts like this, or like mine, the Score Fantasy Football podcast, to give them ideas to help them form their own opinion about what they want to do with their fantasy teams, or what they think is going to happen in a season. And then they can go into the draft and make those decisions. And then they can go to the waiver wire and their roster, their lineup, and make those decisions on their own. Because to me, that is way more fun than just, listening to my rankings and doing exactly that. Although I will say, a guy that I work with was in a fantasy league a few years back. He started up a league with his friends and all their wives, and the wives didn't really follow football. And his wife said she was just going to use my rankings the whole year, and she won the league just using my rankings. So maybe it can work.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting that you say that, because I think that's what we try to do as well, is to kind of analyze the news and look at different things, but not come up with a definitive yes or no answer, because especially in football, it's almost impossible to have the crystal ball and say, hey, should I, we get start and sit questions every now and then. And it's like, hey, do I start, I don't know, Diggs or Tyreek Hill? I'm like, I don't know. They're both, I mean, it's not a great example, but they're both good players. Well, and
I love too when I get people going, well, you have this player, wide receiver 20, and this player, wide receiver 23. Why are you so low on the guy at wide receiver 23? And I was like,
exactly.
In my projections, that's like, just nothing. Like every week I could change that. Like it's so close. Right. So yeah, but that's another thing of helping people realize that, just because there's 4 spots difference in the rankings, they might be in the same tier. Right. So that's why we make sure we include tiers and stuff in the draft kit that we have as well. So yeah, it's just a fun process, and I continue to just feel very, very fortunate that, I am where I am, and still, so hungry that I want to, stay there and keep things going as well as they have been the last few years, for sure.
Cool. Well, thanks for that. And so what's the kind of process that you have to build these rankings, and what kind of things, for example, in the preseason, would you look for or ignore while we're in the preseason now, to change those rankings up or down in the next couple of weeks?
So, there's a bit of a difference between like the draft rankings, like this time of year when everyone's using those to draft off of before the season, and then the in-season rankings as well. The draft rankings, I mean, it starts as soon as the fantasy season ends last year in early January, I'm putting together my rankings for the next season. And then it's just a long process throughout the off season where you just keep adding more and more data to it, where you're figuring out little things, whether it's the schedule coming out and, how's that going to impact things? Whether it's, free agency and the draft or different injuries or what we learn about injuries along the way. And we have some great injury analysts in the industry, and I like to have them on sort of early in the off season to get a vibe if there's any players they're worried about, long term that might not be there for week one. And then I like to bring them back on kind of closer to the season and get an update. And it's interesting because Joe Burrow was a name that we had Dr. Edwin Porras on back in March. And that was a name that he said, I know everybody thinks he's doing well and he's going to be back for the start of the year, but looking at the timeline and his injury, that's one where maybe he won't be, completely ready week one. And we're kind of seeing that now. I think people are overreacting to the fact that, Joe Burrow has 4 or 5 weeks here to get healthy and to get his legs under him and more confidence in that knee. But we're seeing that he has started camp and he is not 100%, even though maybe in OTAs, it kind of the buzz made it seem like he was doing just fine and was going to be okay. So you kind of just keep adding those little data points and going over it. And, the more you draft yourself, the more you start to test those feelings of, do I really want this player versus that player? When you're on the clock, especially in like dynasty leagues, you're on that clock, you're going to have that player for a long time. You figure out pretty quickly how you feel about players and who you like and who you don't. So it's a long process with that. And then just quickly on the in-season rankings, it's kind of the same thing, but just condensed over like a week. So Sunday, 1:00 here. That's when the first kickoffs go. Rankings are locked. Your rosters are set. I normally, the early games when there's, 8 or 9 games going, I'll sit back and kind of relax and watch those. And then I start making notes. And then I start starting the rankings for the next week, starting the projections, all that stuff on Sunday, because the more I can get done, even if I'm tired on Sunday, the less I'll have to do during the week, or the more other things I can look at during the week. So it's just the thing I've compared it to before is like a mosaic. Like there's a giant picture that you're trying to put together, and there's all these little things that bring it together to give you as clear of a picture as possible. And the picture is never completely clear. I rarely am, totally happy with my rankings. I always feel like if I had a couple more hours, I could have done this or researched that a little more. But it's just time spent and trying to figure out all that stuff along the way. And year over year, you learn little things, you refine your process. I think a few years ago, I was incorporating like historical data a little too far back, because so much changes in the NFL that I think when you look back, 3-4 years, it doesn't have as much of an impact as I thought before, versus, the last couple seasons. So something like that, definitely. And then when you're looking at what you're learning from preseason and training camps, last year, I hated the fact that we didn't have that, because there are some really important things I think you could take away from it. One is we're finally getting to see the rookies going up against NFL competition, right? Like we can create these prospect profiles, what we think these guys are going to be. But then when you see them on the field, even if it is against second stringers or whatever, you see them on the field and you start to realize pretty quickly, do they belong? Are they not going to be ready? Is this a guy that's going to need a couple of years? Is this a guy that already looks like a bust, right? Like that sometimes is very evident in August in those games. So I really like to see that. I really like to see the depth charts, who's playing ahead of who's still out there deep into the fourth quarter. And maybe that tells you that they're not really in the team's plans and they're going to be on the bubble when it comes to the cuts. And then also, I just love to learn about some of those deeper guys, because then, week 9, week 10, a rash of injuries hits a backfield, let's say, and they're down to their 3rd or 4th string running back. Well, now not only have I scouted that guy for, the profile of the draft, but also I've seen that guy play a little bit on a field against some NFL competition. So I kind of have an idea of what kind of player they are, versus I think a lot of people at that point are just going, who is that guy? And then they're trying to play catch up, right? So that gives me a little bit of a head start. And that's something I've definitely gotten deeper in since I've become full-time fantasy, and I kind of have that whole off season to work on it. I've gone a little deeper with that stuff. And I think that just makes me a better analyst and a better fantasy player all around. And then the other thing you could say is some of the breakouts and sleeper guys, maybe they were getting buzz in practices, OTAs, training camp. you want to see if they're bringing it to the field. Are they continuing, because sometimes there's guys that practice really well, and then when the season comes and the lights are on, they never really carve out that role. They never really come through in the games. So you want to see in even preseason contests, are they continuing to produce? Are they continuing to be noticed and impress everybody? Yeah. And if they are, and they have been all off season, then you got a pretty good chance that, they will end up breaking out during the year. Or they will end up coming through as that sleeper guy for you.
Yeah, cool. And the typical thing that we say is don't get too excited by a guy who breaks out like crazy in the preseason. It doesn't necessarily mean that, week one he's going to be the guy. But it's interesting that
I'm picturing Amir Abdullah a few
exactly.
years back running for a long touchdown in the preseason. Yeah.
For instance,
we might have bought in a little too much on that one.
Yeah, I don't know. Epstein, do you remember him?
Oh, I do. I thought I was like a genius when I picked him. Like I reached for him during I think it was one of the first fantasy we had. So Mark said, "Okay, you're making some reports." I said, "Yeah," and I think the hype lasted 2 games. Then he got injured.
Something
I think,
like that. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Wasn't too long.
Hey, we have a quick question actually on YouTube. Do you manage to put your feelings aside when you're drafting and doing your rankings?
If I said yes, I would be lying. For years as a Buffalo Bills fan, I was very good about not being a homer. I was very good about not drafting Bills players or overdrafting Bills players. And that's because I saw so many friends do that along the way. I remember one year, Marshawn Lynch, when he was with the Bills, was like a 3rd or 4th round pick, and someone took him like 3rd overall in the first round of a draft that I was in. So I learned very quickly, don't be that person. Don't be the homer that just takes players from your team. But the spot where I was bad was I never wanted to draft Patriots players. So for years, I never had Gronk on my team. I never had Brady on my team. Really hurt during like that 2007 year when, Randy Moss and all those guys, they were just putting up huge stats. Never wanted to root for a Patriots player. Now, Tom Brady left and went to the Bucs, and I traded for him in a dynasty league last year. I needed that rental quarterback to come in and be my second QB. It was super flex. So now it's fine. Now we can have Brady and Gronk. All those guys can be on my team. But when they were with the Patriots and beating down the Bills all those years, that is one area where, I let my feelings kind of get in the way, and I would pass on those guys sometimes, probably foolishly.
Yeah. And I feel like the more you play and the more leagues you play in every year, it becomes pretty much impossible. You end up with, players from every single team in one roster somewhere. And I find like one of the hard things for us, we haven't been playing as long as you have, but maybe 5 years ago when we started the show, then we had like public leagues that we joined and a whole bunch of other leagues that we're doing, and every year there's more and more. And the first couple times it's like, okay, so what do I do now? Because I have Kelsey on my roster in this league, and then I'm playing against Kelsey on and that after a while it's like, it doesn't really matter anymore. Just enjoy the games. I actually prefer, it's like, just enjoy the games, trust your fantasy process and see what happens at the end.
Well, and then it becomes, you have to make sure that you're not overweight on one individual player.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
Another area where I sometimes am too trusting of my rankings, my projections, and sometimes I just sort of throw caution to the wind with that. And I will, if I keep getting a guy to value, I will keep going to him. And that is not the way to do it, but I am probably a little silly in doing that. But a guy like Robert Woods, I feel like I take Robert Woods in every single league that I'm in. I can't get away from him. And now he's got a better quarterback this year. So how on earth could this be the year where I'm like, no, I'm not going to go in on Robert Woods. He's a little older. I'm still grabbing him on like every team. And you got to be smart about these things. So don't, it's do as I say, not as I do. So, you can not let those sentiments kind of, get in the way. Don't let those feelings, those personal feelings about players or whatever, don't let that impact you. You shouldn't, even though I did. And then make sure you're conscious of, how many times you drafted a player across all your leagues, because you don't want that player to get injured and then your entire fantasy season is gone just because you drafted the same guy
Absolutely.
in the second round, all year long.
Absolutely. So, changing gears a little bit and seeing, what the strategy is for redraft, as we're gonna soon in 3 or so weeks, start drafting, I guess, for the redraft. For 2021, I mean, we hear different strategies. There's been the zero RB or modified zero RB or anchor RB, whatever it's called. Over the last few years, I feel like that's now almost people are calling you out for trying that, because it's like, no, if you don't have at least one good running back, you're screwed. There's some people do the exact opposite, still kind of wait as long as they can for wide receivers, because there's so much depth in the middle rounds. Back in the day, I think I spent probably the first 3 years of this podcast trying to tell everyone, just wait on your quarterback, especially that I think in a single quarterback league, that's where the biggest difference between reality and fantasy is. Some of the biggest stars in the game are taken 8th, 9th, 10th round. So I always said, yeah, wait on quarterback. And now I'm not even sure we should wait on quarterback anymore, because there's so many guys that can break out and really make a difference. What would you say, looking at 2021 and a couple pointers for the guys who are starting out and, they know football, but they're not quite sure what to do for in terms of how they build their roster? What would you say to them?
Well, I'm having a lot of fun with this right now, actually, because we're in the middle of our season preview series. So we do an episode on each position on our podcast, and I bring on a guest. And this year, I've picked the guest for each position is the person who is the most accurate ranker for that position. So it's been good. And in each show, we talk about kind of the strategy of how you're approaching, that specific position and how that kind of factors into your drafts as a whole. So we've talked a lot about this, and we already did the QB and running back episodes. This week, we'll have the wide receiver and tight end episodes out. So check those out. For me, I've found that, no, I don't think zero RB is dead by any means. I think it is still a solid strategy. If you can get that elite tight end and you can get really good receivers off the top, you're sort of minimizing the risk, to be honest. As silly as that sounds, that is the way that you would minimize the risk, because that way running back is the most volatile position. We see it every year. Very rarely do we have all these first and second round running backs come out unscathed. Nobody gets hurt, nobody declines, any of that stuff. There's a lot of turnover at running back. So if you can solidify those other positions where they tend to get injured less, elite tight end right now is something I'm trying to do everywhere, because you just can't match the production that you're going to get from those top guys like Kelsey and Waller. And we'll see if Kittle can come back and put up the same stats that he was putting up before he got hurt last year. But you can't match that later in the draft, where with these running backs, we see every season these injuries pop up. There's so much turnover at the position. You can grab guys on the waiver wire, but also in your draft, in the middle rounds and the later rounds, you can just stock up on these sort of high upside backup guys that either they have a shot to potentially emerge and win the job. Sometimes you have a rookie that, still could win the job completely, or you have an injury to a guy in front of them. We just saw with Darrell Henderson, Henderson, there was that injury. He was a guy that I was kind of touting as one of these top backups to grab, because if Cam Akers went down during the year, we didn't expect it was going to happen in the summer, but Akers goes down, all of a sudden Henderson is an RB2 with maybe some potential to be even more than that in that offense. So it's still a good strategy. It's not one that I often do. I find in Dynasty, I will take that approach, and I'm in the middle of a Dynasty draft right now where we're 8 rounds in and I haven't taken a running back yet. And it's 14 teams, and maybe that's going to make me look a little goofy, depending who I can pull here. But I've really solidified myself with younger talent who I think could be big-time stars at the other positions. And then I just have to worry about running back. And running back, especially in Dynasty, is one where the shelf life for those guys seems so short, right? Like you might get 3 good seasons or something. They start to get up into that 25, 26-year-old range, and all of a sudden you start to worry that, are they on the decline now? So if you can get those guys, if you can kind of cultivate your team with the talent and the young players, the other positions, it gives you that big window. And then you can come in and find those running backs along the way, whether it's injuries popping up throughout the year, or, you get lucky in the draft, you pick up some guys, you can kind of get some of those younger backs in there to fill out. And then all of a sudden you got a real powerful team in redraft for me. And whatever you want to call it, people call it modified RB or hero RB or elite RB. That's the one that I tend to do the most, where I'm grabbing one running back in the first or second, a guy who I think has top 5 upside at the position. And then I'm looking at the other positions and I'm trying to fill all those spots like I just talked about. And there's some great value at receiver, from round 2 to round 6 or 7. You can get some really good players in there. And then you can look at even potentially getting an interesting quarterback in that top 5. If one of those guys falls, I won't pay up for Mahomes or Josh Allen. Those guys normally go earlier than I want to grab them. But if you have a Lamar who was on the COVID list, if you have Dak who's dealing with a shoulder injury, if everything turns out okay with those guys, and I think right now it seems like they're going to be all right, they have the potential to be the number 1 overall fantasy quarterback. Like they're that good. So if they fall a round or 2 and you can get them, I would spend up on those guys. Other than that, normally I'm with you. I would look at quarterback in the 9th to the 11th round in a normal league, in a 12-team league. And you can get guys this year like Matthew Stafford and Tom Brady and Ryan Tannehill. You can get some of those guys in there.
Fitzpatrick.
And if I don't do that, then, I'll wait and I'll grab Trey Lance or Justin Fields, who I think have top 10 upsides once they get under center. The only thing is, when are they going to get under center?
Yeah.
And then I will pair them with more veteran guy, maybe somebody who has a easier early season schedule. Kirk Cousins is a guy like that. There's a couple guys you could look at. Sam Darnold, depending what you think of him, he's got some nice weapons and a very easy schedule to start the season. So he could be somebody else that you look at real cheap to kind of pair with one of those guys and give you a starter for the first few games. So normally, to sum it all up there, my strategy, I grab 1 running back early in the first 2 rounds, try to get an elite tight end, fill out wide receiver, and then come back to running back around round 7, round 8, when those other positions are full, and try to hit on some of those upside guys. If you can get a Trey Sermon in that area, Michael Carter, or the high-end backups like Tony Pollard and AJ Dillon, who are just like 1 injury away from being an RB1 and a potential league winner. And then you get your quarterback a little later.
And if you do that, how aggressively would you target the perceived backup of that top running back that you took later in the draft? Would you try, maybe a couple rounds earlier just to make sure that you have it on your roster, or are you?
It depends on the back. Like, that's not why I did that with Cam Akers in our dynasty startup. I just liked Henderson. I just thought when I was picking in that range that he was the best value. And I debated not taking him because, it almost limits your upside at that point, where if you're just hedging and grabbing that guy, maybe you grab a backup of somebody else, and then when the injury happens, now you have 2 starters, right? So that's not why I did that in that league. I will do that, but it really just depends on the back and who the backup is, because some teams it's pretty clear who that guy is. If it was like Washington and Antonio Gibson, who's the guy there? Like, I kind of think that the rookie Jared Patterson's going to end up in that kind of direct backup role, but it could be Peyton Barber. It could be some combination of JD McKissick and Peyton Barber. It could be anything, right? So it's not as clear. Whereas if it's Ezekiel Elliott, it's Tony Pollard. I would feel much more comfortable getting Tony Pollard, knowing full well that it's a 1-for-1 if Zeke goes down, versus some of those backfields where it isn't as clear and it's kind of dangerous at that point to then take a shot on it. That one would be a case by case basis depending on which back I take early.
Excellent. Yeah, I think, I don't know about you, Epstein, but I tend to, that is my preferred strategy as well. I feel more comfortable with a top running back, although if I don't get him, I'm quite happy going either receiver, or the last couple of years tight end, just because, Kelsey and Waller and some other guys just so far ahead of the competition at that position.
And I'll say too, and this kind of goes with what you're saying, is that I don't think you should go into a draft with a hard and fast, I have to do this, I have to pick this player. You got to kind of let the draft come to you, right? And sometimes quarterbacks will fall a lot later than you expect. Sometimes they'll go off the board a lot earlier, and then it can be really beneficial at that point to wait because quarterback's so deep. I really think you have to be willing to adapt along the way in your draft. And that means sometimes I take 2. We're doing a mock in my office right now that I'm going to write up later in the week. And I took Alvin Kamara early in the first round, and then Austin Eckler was there at the end of the second. And I think that's great value. So I went RB, and then I'll figure it out along the way. And you have to adapt because I like the value so much of that second running back in round 2. So you just got to be willing to kind of pivot if, that value kind of changes or something happens that you didn't expect in the draft, or there's a run on a position and you didn't foresee it coming as early as it did. And now guess what? You're not getting an elite tight end. You got to wait or something like that. Like, you got to be willing to move along the way, because that's the smartest approach, is to be willing to adapt. If you just come in very rigid about what you're going to do, you're probably going to end up making a bad selection along the way because you're trying to stick to whatever plan you were on.
Yeah, that's great advice. Aptine, what about you? What do you think?
Totally agree. The only thing that I wanted to mention is that the first time I think we had the show, we had 14-team league, and I won because I went zero strategy and zero heavy strategy, and I never thought I was doing this in my entire fantasy life. So I think I took Kareem Hunt.
You had Kareem Hunt, and Spencer Ware got injured during the draft.
So I got very lucky, but when I don't pick, an RB in the first 2 rounds, I just feel very insecure. So I need a running back maybe to start building the complete roster around this running back. So, but as we said, I think we just need to go along the way and how the draft is going to go, and pick the best player that we can, obviously.
And it's risky doing zero RB, but those are the teams, like you just said, that when it hits, man, does it hit. Like, when that comes through and you get a decent running back or two later in your draft, like that year with Kareem Hunt, your team's almost unstoppable at that point.
Yeah, but I think it just maybe, starting to be more lucky than, a real strategy, because
for sure.
And someone getting injured. But I think I just got very lucky, and if I didn't have Kareem Hunt for this draft, I didn't know how I was going to survive even the first one. But as you said, there's a lot of turnover for running backs that tend to get very injured and during the season. So it's good, to capitalize, taking the good running backs, or RB2, the one with a lot of upside, and maybe the one that we don't know what's on the depth chart, and something when we don't have a clear-cut RB1 like Zeke or someone else, but it's a very risky strategy, as you said.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth mentioning too, considering roster construction when you're going about this stuff. So if you're going with zero RB and you get that elite tight end, maybe you get a high-end quarterback and you get those elite receivers, you don't need to spend a bunch of bench spots on those guys now, because you're not now trying to find the next big tight end or quarterback or receiver. You're set at those positions. You can fill your entire bench with running backs and those backup guys. So you have more kind of bullets to fire at that one position, in hopes that, like you said, it's risky, and you can just kind of hope that you get lucky which guy's going to get injured and did you have that backup. But if you're filling your entire bench with those guys, you got more chances to end up hitting on one of them.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and you need to be ready to spend a lot of money on the waiver wire. So
that aggressive on the waiver wire is also a very important part of that. Yeah,
that's actually a great segue to a question I wanted to ask you as well. In terms of auction waiver wire strategy, obviously, I feel like reading all the American analysts versus what happens in France. I don't know if it's a culture thing, but people don't spend much money on the waiver here. And I've always wondered, like, okay, I don't know, an example, I think, was it 3-4 years ago, whatever, Tariq Cohen had an awesome week 1 with a couple touchdowns. And everyone was like, yeah, spend, I don't know, some articles were like 40%, 50, 60% of your waiver wire money. This was week 1, right? And that's exactly what I did. I think the second bid was maybe $5, and I completely overspent for Cohen, and he didn't. I don't think he even scored a touchdown the rest of the way. Probably got injured week 3 or something. And but I was interested, because then I went on Twitter and I saw some I think it was Sean Corner was like, how much did you spend on your waiver for Cohen? And most people said between 50 and 80, which was even more. And so basically, yeah, the question is, what's your approach of the waiver, and how aggressive do you want to be on certain players where you really think they're going to make an impact, versus keeping a bit of money throughout the season so that you can make a splash when there's a sure thing.
Mark. I have my pen, so I'm ready to.
I feel like in the times that I've sat on the money, it there's no guarantee there's going to be that player later in the season that you want to spend it on. And then you end up carrying the money to the end of the year and you didn't even use it, or you end up spending it all on a guy that you didn't really need or didn't end up doing much late in the season. I'm more aggressive early on, and you may have even been reading my article about Cohen. Maybe that was my fault that you did that, but I'm very aggressive early in the season about those bids. And you might get it wrong. You might overspend. I do the same. Every league is different too. And that's the fun of that sort of blind bid auction process, right? You don't really know. It could be when you're in a league with other analysts, obviously you could expect that the numbers are probably going to be a little higher on those guys. In more casual leagues, some of the ones I have with my friends, maybe I can spend a little less. And I'm trying to remind myself of that every time I'm setting waiver wires because I want to spend more to make sure I get the guy. But then also you could have that one crazy owner that goes, no, I'm spending my whole budget. I want this player. So anyway, the thing for me is part of the reason why I like to be aggressive early in the season is because if you hit on that guy, you have that guy for the whole year. It's not, I'm picking this guy up for the stretch run. It's, I'm going to have this guy for almost the entire season. And how valuable is that? And maybe you get it wrong, but maybe you don't. Maybe you end up hitting on the right player and you have another starter for the rest of the year. So I'm willing to take those shots early in the season, even if it means, because it's just waiver wire money. If you don't have it, you're going to have to be a little more aggressive and picking guys up in advance. And maybe later in the season, you pick up a defense 2 weeks out for the playoffs, as opposed to picking them up the week of the playoffs because you don't have any money, or, you just got to be a little more aggressive with that stuff later. But when it comes to spending the money, I'm all in early in the season, and we get it wrong. We definitely do. I'm thinking Malcolm Brown last year came out and he looked like the lead back for the Rams. And I think Cam Akers was a little dinged up early in the season, and it was okay. Maybe Malcolm Brown's going to be the guy. He's not the most exciting running back, but he's a guy that does things that coaches like. He's, kind of that jack of all trades. He's not really a master of any, but he was able to go out and have a big game. And then he didn't really do that much the rest of the season. So I'm still willing. I'm not going to be, deterred by that. I'm still willing to spend my money big early in the year on the waiver wire in an attempt to get that player that can make a difference for my whole season. Because I also think there's more guys in those first few weeks that pop up than later in the year, because later in the year now it is pretty much just who got hurt and who's coming in next. And later in the year, after bye weeks, a lot of teams start to stock up on those backup running backs, knowing full well that by that point in the season, who the backup is to roster. So you can go and get them, and you can stock up for the playoffs and hope that you get that guy. So there's not as many waiver wire options normally later in the year, especially when you're talking about receiver or something where there's not as much turnover later in the year. So that's why I want to spend it early in the season and take my shots. I don't want to sit on that money.
Excellent. And another question for in-season management around trades. So I find trades are one of the most fun aspects of fantasy, but they're also somehow the most difficult to have something that seems fair at the end of it. And in our case, we've had plenty of examples where, people, you try to build a trade and it's either, if it's too fair, then they'll say, no, but there's no point. And it always feels like somebody's trying to screw the other guy. And I find, I'm trying to explain, different ways to look at trades, maybe, a position trade, running back versus a receiver if you have injuries, or looking at calendar if you need to win immediately next week just to make the playoffs versus somebody who's sitting in first place, maybe things like that. But do you have any advice on how to search for and build successful trades, and how much time does it take you to get those done?
It's very rare that a trade gets done very quickly. And if it is, then somebody might have done something wrong along the way. I know a few years back, I won't name the analyst, but I'm in a dynasty league with an analyst, and I woke up to a trade offer, and I started to ask other people, like, am I missing something? Like, did this player that they're offering me, like, did he tear his Achilles yesterday and I don't know about this? Like, how on earth did they offer me this deal? And I was giving them the benefit of the doubt that I couldn't believe I was getting that player for what they were asking. And I eventually accepted, but I took the time to make sure that I wasn't missing something. Because sometimes different people just value players differently. Yeah. And they wanted to get off on that player. They wanted to rid them of the roster clearly. and I was able to get a pretty young star for cheap. And I still to this day don't really understand it, but that can happen. Now, I think the best way to craft deals, I don't like when people just go put trade bait out and just put, here's the 5 players that I want to get rid of, or here's the guy that I want my roster. Because then you're kind of announcing to the league, like, I don't value this player. It's better to kind of look around the league. I also don't like when people just kind of spam everyone with offers. Like, here's 10 offers. I'm going to offer this player to like every team in the league, and it's not going to be a great deal. And I'm just going to hope that somebody clicks one of them. That's an approach you could take. It's not one that I like. I don't like doing it. I don't like receiving those offers because I'm never going to accept them. But I think the best approach is look at the rosters around your league, look at what you want to give up and what you think about what you need, and look at who has a surplus of that. Look at who might be willing, because you have to think like the other manager, right? You have to think, are they going to accept this deal? Because the best possible trade is a trade that makes both teams better. And those trades exist. Like, if you have a lot of receivers and I have a lot of running backs and you're thin at running back and I'm thin at receiver, we can make both our teams better here. Why wouldn't we? This is going to be a fantastic deal. So you want to look around and figure out, you don't want to just go to the team that has Christian McCaffrey and offer, well, I'll give you, this waiver wire fodder and a first round pick for Christian McCaffrey. Is that okay? Like, no, they're not going to do that. Why? Think about that manager. Why on earth would they get rid of Christian McCaffrey? So you have to craft a deal that's going to entice them, that's going to make their team better or make them think that their team is better. It's okay to win a trade, but don't try to rip everybody off in your league, because that's awful. And the other problem with that is if you manage to do it, it upsets the entire league too. Like, I've been in leagues where you have that happen. You have someone accept a deal that really they probably shouldn't have. And then I start to feel like, why am I in this league? Like, if there's managers that are going to make deals like that, and then I have to go look and I have to go try to rip off other teams. And now I don't want to do that because that's not fun either. So I think the smart thing is look around, try to figure out who has what you need and who might need what you have and are willing to give up, and try to come up with a deal like that. And just make sure you're thinking like the other manager. Make sure that there's a reason why they would make that trade, not just because you want that trade to happen, because very rarely will that go down if that's your only approach.
Yeah, totally agreed. We get some of these trades every now and then where clearly somebody's valued completely differently. And the worst part is often when that happens, it's not the person who ends up with the better player isn't the one initiating the deal. And it's the other guy who thought, oh yeah, we got an example. I mean, this week in one of our dynasties, I think DJ Moore got traded for pretty much nothing. And I'm like, why did you let DJ Moore go? Talk to me before I could have given you a deal for DJ Moore. But it's exactly what you say. It's like, it's difficult. It changes the balance of the league, and then nobody kind of trusts each other anymore for trades. So it's difficult. But it's also. I was just gonna say it's super satisfying when some good trades happen and actually do help both sides, and that's the best part.
And the other thing that I will say while we're talking about trades is do not have vetoes in your league. That is the worst. Yeah, you don't need to have a trade get approved by every other manager or by the commissioner. Shut that off. Trades should be automatic. If there's somebody in your league that's making really cringeworthy trades, you probably want to talk about getting them out of your league. Then you might not want to invite them back next year, right? You don't want to have that thing where I have to wait 2 days. So if I have to make a trade by Friday in order to have that player by Sunday, and maybe I've seen it so many times where people think a trade is lopsided and then in the end it's not, because the person was right. That player went to break out. So in the moment, it's tough to necessarily know exactly what's going to happen with that deal. And sometimes we think that it's lopsided, and it turns out that it ended up being okay. So that's why you got to have trades off, because you could veto a trade that, down the road, it would have looked like it was completely fine. So that's another side when looking at that stuff.
So switching gears a little bit and looking back at the present and what's going on in the news, we usually start off the podcast with injury news and things like that. So we haven't had a show for a couple weeks. So there are a few players that are either coming back or have been injured in the last couple of weeks that we can talk about. And at the same time, I'll ask you for your opinion on that player for this year's draft, and in general, because we have a question on Facebook as well about this. what's your opinion of superstars that are injured during preseason, and how do you draft them? So starting off with Carson Wentz, who injured his foot a couple weeks ago, got surgery, and is out for between 5 to 12 weeks. But from what I've heard, the Colts are fairly positive about it, and maybe the lower part of that range would be realistic for him, and maybe he would be back by maybe the end of September or something. But with his injury history and what we know about him, what are your thoughts on Wentz for the season?
Well, first, just with injuries in general, when we're talking about the stars getting hurt and stuff, it's case by case completely. So it's good that we're going to go over them kind of individually here, because you can't just kind of do a blanket statement. I know some people want to say, if a guy's hurt, I'm 100% not taking him. But
yeah,
if you can get good injury information and you know that that player is going to be back at a decent amount of time, you could get a nice value on that player. I remember a year where people thought Jordy Nelson was hurt several years ago, and I got him at a real nice value in drafts, and he ended up being a huge star for my team when everyone was shying away from him. So you got to look at it case by case. For Carson Wentz, it's not so much that we're looking at Carson Wentz as a fantasy option in 2 quarterback leagues and super flex leagues, sure. Yeah. But we're looking at it more because we want to know what's going to happen with that offense as a whole. There's some injuries on the offensive line. It seems like Quentin Nelson's going to be back on the early side. I know initially with Carson Wentz, there was some reports that made it seem like it was going to be kind of the longer range of that time frame, but now it seems like they're being a little more positive about it. And I'm with you there that it seems like he'll be back in September potentially. The bigger issue with him is that he hasn't gotten all this time to gel with his new teammates, right? He's going to a new team. Now he knows the system pretty well from his days with Frank Reich with the Eagles, but he's going to this team with these new players, quarterbacks, receivers. They got to get on the same page. He is not going to have that really valuable time in August to get on the same page with those guys. So that hurts kind of the outlook for them, for Michael Pittman, for Paris Campbell, for T.Y. Hilton, if you're still into T.Y. Hilton.
Yeah.
Jonathan Taylor's hurt by this as well, because not only is he not going to have his quarterback maybe early in the year, and who knows what Jacob Eason or Sam Ehlinger can do, but not only that, but some of these injuries in the offensive line, are they going to be completely healthy to start the season? So it has to bump Taylor down a little bit. I've seen people talk about, having him way down, like even in the 3rd round, someone mentioned on my show. I think that's crazy. I think you still take him in the 2nd round, and that's a nice value there. And he's probably still going to return late 1st round value. The receivers, I wasn't overly high on any of them before. They're all kind of dart throws. There's a lot of talk that Michael Pittman could break out. Paris Campbell is someone that I can't wait to see him stay healthy, if he can stay healthy. And maybe that's why they're having all these other injuries. The voodoo doll got poked for those guys this year, and Paris Campbell's finally going to be healthy, because his injuries, it's not that he's an injury prone player. He is a guy that, if healthy, we saw last year in the first game, a ton of targets his way. He plays in that area of the field they love throwing the ball to. So he's a guy that could pick up a lot of yak after the catch too. So really interested to see them, but they're all just kind of dart throws at this point. They're guys that you're going to look at later in drafts, not somebody that you're going to draft and you really feel strong that they're going to be able to come out, because even when Wentz does come back here, because he didn't have that ramp up time, when are we going to see the real version of the Colts offense? It might be halfway through the year before they're completely comfortable with each other. So it really makes me shy away from the passing attack there. Not that we were overly excited about them. Still in on Taylor, and then Wentz is, he's a risky pickup if you're looking at him in a 2 quarterback or a super flex league.
Yeah, agreed. The only thing that makes me feel a little bit more positive is that the Colts in general are trying to win the season. So I'm always a bit scared with teams, like we saw with Mixon last year, where the Bengals had no interest in trying to win anyway, and they just shut him down. Whether it was because he was properly injured or not, we'll never really know. But I always found it was a bit weird, the reports coming out. Yeah, he came back in the game, and then he was at practice, but just not practicing. But it never really seemed that bad of an injury. And then he ended up sitting out the last 8 or 9 games of the season. At least the Colts are trying to win, so I hope they do bring him back.
If Eason or Sam Ehlinger play the first 3-4 games and they start out 0-3 or 0-4, it might be a little hard for them. We'll see. Yeah. Hopefully that's not the case.
Next guy I want to talk about is Dak Prescott, coming back from a terrible injury, but that seems fine now. It's more his shoulder on his throwing arm, a baseball injury, from what I understand. Again, Dallas doesn't seem too concerned, but it's not great. He's missing some valuable time with the offense, although he knows the offense at least. And he's in some rankings a top 3 quarterback for this year. So do you bump him down, or do you, on the contrary, target him, especially in superflex leagues, if he drops down to the end of the first round, for example?
No.
I bumped him down to quarterback 5, so at the bottom of that initial top 5 guys that I talked about earlier. I'm not that concerned about it yet. I'm definitely going to pay close attention, though, because anytime you're talking about an injury around the throwing arm there for a quarterback, that is not a good thing, and especially on an offense where they're going to have to throw the ball a lot. That's one of the reasons why we like Dak so much. Yeah, he runs the ball a little bit, but also we saw it last year. The Cowboys' defense was terrible. It's not going to be that much better this year. They're going to be forced into these shootouts, and he has all of these weapons available to him. So that's why we like him. We don't want to see a situation where he comes out and, has a dead arm or can't kind of throw the ball 40 times a game, which we kind of hope that he can. So it's one that I'm watching pretty closely, but I haven't really moved him down, and I haven't really moved down any of the weapons there yet. I'm still pretty high on that Cowboys offense this year.
And Saquon Barkley is back, activated from the PUP list yesterday, practicing. Is still questionable for first week of the season, but seems to be going okay. Although there was just before he was activated, word, people were starting to get quite worried that he might not play maybe the first month, or even now saying, maybe he's going to be limited to 8 to 10 touches instead of the 20 that we're hoping for the first few months. How worried are you? And I've seen Saquon drop, in the second round of a dynasty I've just done, and in the third round of a redraft. Is that crazy?
I got him,
or
I got him at the end of the second, and I drafted him at the end of the second in a best ball. Now, best ball a little different because you don't have to worry as much about figuring out those early weeks. You can grab other guys later that could kind of fill in those spots for you. But overall, I think that people are going to be happy to own Saquon Barkley come October. I think he might get off to a slow start to the year, but overall, a week or two where he's not getting full touches, or even if he sits out those 2 weeks, once he's back and good to go, and he should be, like, timeline wise, he should be at some point in the season here, whether it is, late September or early October. I think that he's going to be a guy that, if anybody could match CMC, if anybody could match McCaffrey's production, it's a guy like Barkley. So I want him on my teams. If I can get that discount right now, I wouldn't spend the first rounder to get him, but if I can get that discount and get him in the second, I want the upside that he's going to give me. Whether it takes, halfway through the year or down the stretch, he's going to be a player that can win you weeks. Absolutely. So you never want to see a player coming back from an injury and having to spend high draft capital to get them. It's not ideal, but in his case, I mean, Barkley is just such an elite talent that, once he is healthy, and to me, it seems like he's going to be okay. All the injury analysts that I've seen have talked about it, that, even if week 1, and I think week 1 is still in play for him, they could be just sort of downplaying this. We still have, 4 weeks or so to go here before the start of the season. I think he's going to be okay, and I think you're going to be happy you drafted him if you got that discount in the second or the third. Is just amazing. I mean, smash that button all day long if he's in the third.
Absolutely. Joe Burrow, we mentioned a bit earlier in the show. I think the only question there is if the reports continue, like they are now, of, okay, well, he might be struggling a little bit. At what point do you maybe take the receivers down a notch in the rankings? Because there are 3 really good receivers in that team from a fantasy perspective.
We would have to hear this for several more weeks before I was going to do that. I think with him having a full month here to kind of, get the ghosts, the Sam Darnold ghosts that he's seeing kind of thing, to get that out of his head, if that's his concern, because he's saying that it's mental, right? It's not physical. It's holding him back. It's just kind of in his head that he's worried about getting hit on that knee.
Sure.
I think this is going to be fine. I have almost zero concern right now, and I think people just overreacted, and some days there's not a lot of news and something like that pops up and people want to go crazy about it. Let's see where he's at in a couple of weeks, and I'm guessing that they're going to be fine. I think we already saw a report a couple of days after that he had an okay practice.
Yeah.
So
I'm
not that worried about it at all. And especially when you talk about all the weapons that he has there, and you're bringing in Chase, and that's another one where people were saying that Jamar Chase isn't creating as much separation in practice.
I heard that. Yeah.
Well, he's a rookie. I know he's this great prospect, but he's a rookie. And we're talking about the beginning of training camp still. Like, give the guy some time. Like, this time last year, no one was talking about Justin Jefferson as a 1,400-yard receiver. They were talking about Justin Jefferson as a guy that was coming off the COVID list, and he missed a lot of time as a rookie, and he's not going to have a regular training camp and preseason. And how's that going to impact him? Is he going to produce? And then the guy comes out and just blows everybody away. So
yeah, from right away as well.
Chase, I do wonder that it is possible that this year we see T. Higgins outperform Chase, because T. Higgins did a fantastic job last year, and by all accounts came back this year in much better shape and ready to go. So they're going to be a dynamic 1-2 punch. Maybe this season Higgins will get the edge on him. Overall, I would still take Chase though long term.
All right. Well, speaking of Justin Jefferson, just a bad fall the other day on his shoulder. There was worries that it might be a broken bone or something, but actually it's just a AC joint sprain, which apparently should mean that he might be fine for week 1. Are you worried about this injury at all, or you don't let it affect your ranking?
It's one that I'm going to have to do more research on as we get closer to the season, just to try to line up exactly what that timeline is going to be. And I'm sure we're going to get plenty of updates because he's a young superstar. So there'll be lots that comes out on that. But right now I haven't moved him down very far. I would still be willing to take him in sort of the end of the second round there. And if he falls to the third, I like him there as well.
There aren't many receivers in that depth chart as well behind Thielen and Jefferson. So.
And Adam Thielen's a guy that I'm not that excited about this year. He's really touchdown dependent. So I've said the stat about 1 million times, I feel like, on my show, but he's been held under 60 yards in 17 of his last 25 games over the last couple seasons. So he's been so touchdown dependent. Now, if Jefferson's not 100%, maybe that helps Thielen a little bit, but you're going to need Thielen to get another one of those double-digit touchdown seasons. And I think touchdown regression is going to come for him, especially when you talk about Irv Smith, guy who's generating a lot of hype, especially around the red zone in practice. Dalvin Cook, we know what he's going to do. So if Jefferson's healthy, I'm worried about Thielen's prospects this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And last guy, Kenny Golladay on the Giants with a hamstring injury, talking about 2 to 3 weeks, which seems an optimistic timeline potentially. And we know that hamstring injuries, especially for receivers, are always tough to get rid of, and we've seen it with Julio Jones last year, and also obviously Golladay and Jones need that time to get used to each other in the Giants offense. So what are you doing about Golladay?
Yeah, I'm moving him down. That's one that I am kind of concerned about. Not necessarily like soft tissue injuries. Yeah, we don't like that, but also just not having that time with this new offense with the quarterback that, I mean, from what I've read in training camp, what we've seen from Daniel Jones, I don't have a lot of confidence that Daniel Jones is going to be that good. I'm so sorry. I know I see it, but I think you're going to be really happy next year when you guys are drafting an actual, good quarterback at the top of the first round. So I don't know that Daniel Jones can be able to put it together. I had some hope for him for fantasy just because he has the rushing ability too. But what we saw with the turnovers last year, not just the picks, but the fumbles.
It's the fumbles.
And then what we kind of, what we've heard so far, I don't think he's a guy. And when you talk about, they got him the weapons and that was great. But when you look at some of these other teams that, tried to help their young quarterback along by surrounding them with weapons, they also often address the offensive line. And the Giants really, they tried a little bit, but it hasn't totally worked out. Now that offensive line is a problem. When you have a quarterback that isn't great under pressure, that's an even bigger problem. And you have a quarterback that likes to turn the ball over, that's an even bigger problem. So I worry that, that Daniel Jones is not long for this job this season, even though he has some good talent around him. And now when you talk about his new fancy weapon in the receiving core, not being ready, not being there for the preseason, and then we'll see when he can return early in the season. That's a big issue. And I think all those guys have to be bumped down.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've got to agree with you on that one.
I love that you didn't want to agree. You hesitated so long. You did not want to agree there.
No, it's true, and the same thing I think can be said about Cincinnati surrounding Burrow with Chase, who's his buddy from college, but not necessarily, arguably, the smartest move for him because I think I forget the
Pini Sedouet.
Thank you. Yeah, the name of the offensive lineman who went to, where did he go? Chargers? So that's going to be awesome for yeah.
He went to the Lions, I believe.
Yes.
To the Lions. Sorry, yeah, to the Lions. So I mean, and that would have arguably been a better pick for Burrow's confidence and time in the pocket and all that. But the Giants, I think
it could be.
When you look at the amount
especially when we're talking about the ghosts and all that stuff, and if your offensive line can't protect you, it could end up being a problem for Burrow for sure.
Absolutely.
He was still producing last year, though, even with a bad offensive line, and you could argue that the offensive line, though not that much better, it might be a little bit better than last year. So hopefully he can stay upright, and it doesn't end up just getting hurt again. We don't want to see, another David Carr type situation where the guy comes into the league for the Texans and just gets hit constantly for the first few years and ends up having a very short career because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I don't want to keep you for too long. I don't know if Aptine, do you have any specific questions you wanted to ask?
I had a couple, but I think we can go very, very, very quickly on it. What do you think of who's going to be? Maybe I'm going to start with this one. Who's going to be the Justin Jefferson 2021?
Who's going to be the Justin Jefferson of 2021?
Yeah.
Oh wow. I don't know that there is one. Chase would be the obvious choice there. There really isn't a guy. If you want to talk about like someone kind of coming out of nowhere, Terrace Marshall would probably be my choice at that point. And I was very sad. He just got taken in the dynasty startup that I'm doing right now. He just got taken this morning, and I was hoping he was going to fall back to me. But when you look at the connection that he has to the offensive coordinator there, Joe Brady, going back to their time at LSU, you look at that, he had a lot of competition in college. And when those guys moved out of the way, he was able to produce. Going to a team that has been pretty successful under that new coaching staff, their passing attack, even though it was Teddy Bridgewater there last year, all three of their receivers did pretty well. And then you combine that with the reports that we got from OTAs, what we're hearing in training camp, that Marshall's really showing out pretty well. Now, Robbie Anderson wasn't there for some of that time, so it allowed Marshall to maybe give a preview of what we're going to see next season if Robbie Anderson doesn't get brought back. But that's one. If we're talking about somebody that could surprise, like Chase, we're all kind of expecting. So if you want to talk about somebody that maybe surprises a little more, I think Marshall could be that guy that, especially if there's an injury in that offense, but he could come out and I don't know about 1,400 yards, but if there's an injury in that offense, he could come out and have that 1,000-yard season and a big touchdown total because he's a big bodied guy and can do some damage around the red zone too.
And staying with the Panthers, what do you think of the situation of Sam Darnold this year?
Well, I like that he's going to get that easy schedule and he's going to get that revenge game against the Jets really early. So that should fuel him. In going back and to bring things full circle and to talk about the Dynasty League, the international one we did, I took one quarterback early and then I was waiting on my second quarterback. And I kind of looked at every option, right? Who was going to be a value? And I went over the Daniel Joneses and the Sam Darnolds. And I just couldn't find anything that got me that excited about Sam Darnold other than the situation itself. I mean, what he's done since he went to the pros. I know you can make all the excuses in the world. It was the Jets and he didn't have the talent around him and bad offensive line for years and Adam Gase. And now he's got the coaching staff and now he's got these weapons. So the possibility is there, but it wasn't enough for me to pull the trigger on him in that draft. And that, could have been a great move because in a super flex dynasty league, he's still very young. So if you hit on that, you end up getting this quarterback at a real discount. I still didn't have the confidence to do it. So I think that he can give you what Teddy Bridgewater did last year. So he can give you some decent numbers this season, not QB1 in fantasy, but he'll do enough to keep all those guys on track and keep them producing for fantasy. But I don't know that he's going to be the long-term option. And I don't want to compare it to the Daniel Jones thing, but it wouldn't surprise me if again next year, and the Panthers are trying to do this on the cheap, right? They're trying to figure out a way to find a quarterback without spending that heavy draft capital. I wonder if they're going to look back and regret not taking a quarterback in the top 10 this year, because that's one where they had a shot. They could have got Justin Fields and he would have looked pretty good in that offense with all those weapons around him. And instead they went this Darnold route and we'll see how it works out. But yeah, I don't feel that great about Sam Darnold this season, but I think he'll do enough to keep that offense moving.
Great.
Well,
thank you.
He's going to be our de facto QB1 in the dynasty, I think, week one. If Watson is not playing and Wentz is injured and Winston, who's our third quarterback, is potentially not the starter.
Well, you got that easy start
it's
to the
all going
season.
downhill for us.
That could buy you a few weeks, right? Try to figure it out. And
hopefully.
that's what's nice about a super flex is you don't have to play a second quarterback. You could play a guy at another position. I don't advise it, but you could when you have to.
No, exactly. Well, this has been awesome. And actually, since you talk about Superflex, just one last question for me. Because I assume you're in many different leagues and many different formats. Do you have a favorite type of format? Not necessarily dynasty versus redraft or anything like that, but a favorite format, either because it's a scoring rule or a position roster kind of thing, Superflex or no kickers or IDP or whatever it is that you prefer over the rest?
Well, if I had to pick, I know you said don't look at it this way, but Dynasty would win over redraft. I've switched most of my redraft leagues into Dynasty leagues so that I would pick Dynasty. I liked for a long time 14-team leagues because when the regular season for fantasy was the 13 weeks, it allowed you to play each team once. So there was no kind of schedule weirdness. You just got to play each team once, and that was good. Everybody kind of had an equal schedule there. Now it's going to be a little different. We're going to have to figure out what, it's probably going to be a 14-game regular season for fantasy. But
what I did for that, sorry, just on that point, what I just did is a 12-team league with 3 divisions. And you play your division rivals twice, I guess, first 3 games and last 3 games, and then everyone else once, and that makes 14. Well, that still does 14 weeks. That's
not bad. That's a good way to do it.
14 weeks, and then you do playoffs 15, 16, 17.
That's a good way to do it. I've seen some people doubling up in the playoffs too. First round of the playoffs is 2 weeks, or the championship is 2 weeks, and it's total points over that.
The problem is the bye weeks on bye weeks 14. That's gonna make it difficult.
Going to be a big problem. Yeah, it's going to be a big problem for people. That last week, teams needing to get into and I mean, not that we need to keep the show going because I know you're kind of wrapping it up, but that's another move. If you're talking about sort of secret strategies, that's a great move. If you start off 0-3, 0-4, and you need to make up a spot, I'm sure most people have heard me or others say this at this point, but you could do those kind of sneaky trades where you trade away a player who hasn't had their bye week yet, and you get back a player who already has. And you kind of buy a game, even if you have to take a little bit of a loss on the trade, you get a player who is going to play every single game the rest of the season, as opposed to one that is going to miss a week. And if you start off real slow and you're 0-3, 0-4, 1-3, whatever, that could give you a chance to maybe, win out or come as close as possible to that and get you back in the playoff mix. So that's one that, and it might not even hurt the other team. If it's a team that's looking at the playoffs and they're picking up this player because they just want them for the stretch run and they're not worried about the bye week thing, then it might work out for all parties involved. So anyway, that's not for me. I would look at it. Half PPR. I really like. I love what people have done with points for first downs. I think that's really, really smart. I know Scott Fish used that in the Scott Fish Bowl. I think that's a really good way to do it. And that way you're not giving the full PPR point. You're making people kind of earn it with the first down. So that's been a really good one. And I just like leagues that are as deep as possible. And you'll know this from our Dynasty League. I like Superflex. I like leagues where in our Dynasty League, you're starting 5 receivers, you're starting 3 running backs, and you're also starting a Superflex and just another flex position on top of, tight end and the quarterback and stuff. So when you go that deep with it, I think that makes it more challenging. I think that makes it more fun. And now you really have to try to craft your team and figure out where you're going to get that production from, because it's tough. When we got further in the draft, you start to realize I got to start this guy. Like, oh my God. And in Dynasty, you got a couple of years to figure that out, but you could still do that in redraft. Just add as many flex positions as you want. And it's just going to make it more interesting. And, get rid of kickers. I wouldn't do kickers. Sorry, kickers. I wouldn't do that.
Thank you.
You can get rid of team defense if you want. I like throwing it in there just because it kind of adds a little wrinkle. But if you want to go deeper with that, you can go just minimal IDP. One of my favorite leagues that we ever did, we just did minimal IDP. So we did 1 defensive lineman, 2 DBs, and 3 linebackers. And it kind of unlocked this whole new thing. And that league was fantastic. I've talked about it on our show. I had Scott Fish on, and we talked about kind of weird leagues with different scoring and different rules. And that league was fantastic. The guy that I work with that set it up, they had done, we had a money in the bank challenge where I don't even remember what the actual thing was, but what it was the winner of I think it was like the highest total of that week. If you got the money in the bank, then the next season, because it was a keeper league, the next season, you got to have one situation where on a Monday, if you had a player going, you could swap them for the player that played on Sunday. It was sort of like you bring a guy in last minute, and there was all kinds of little wrinkles like that. And it was just more interesting. And they had kind of, his idea was to build it kind of like UEFA, where you have the main thing, but you also have all these other little challenges and cups and things going along. So he did that. He had the main thing, but then he had like 3 or 4 kind of side challenges where you could win money along the way, and there was extra competition, and it's supposed to be fun, right? Like that's fantasy. As much as I definitely am guilty of this. We spend so much time going over the stats and going over everything, trying to be as precise as possible and putting all this pressure on ourselves to win. It's supposed to be fun. You're playing against friends. You're playing against coworkers. Pick the players you like. Do all that research, like I said, and take a look and listen to this podcast and, look at my draft kit and all of that. But in the end, make your own opinion and make sure you're picking players that you want to root for and that you like, because that's the name of the game. It should be an enjoyable pastime, and you get to chirp and joke around with everybody in your league.
Well, Justin, thank you so much. It's been amazing. Great advice. I'll have to translate some of it in French for all the listeners, but to maybe do bite-sized videos with subtitles.
Captions,
but
captions on the bottom captions, for sure. Yeah. Well, like I said off the top, I appreciate you guys doing this. I'm glad we were able to connect on Twitter and then eventually make this happen. And I'm already excited. Even when we were talking trades and stuff in that Dynasty League, I'm already excited to play against you guys and see how it goes, even though I feel like your team and my team maybe at a slight disadvantage because we've already lost some players.
Yeah.
Here, but
I'm looking at 22
the show
and
was
beyond.
Fantastic. I mean, you guys do a fantastic job here, super professional looking, love the videos and stuff off the top. And it's awesome. I'm just so happy that we were able to kind of shine the light on. I went on the show with the guys from Brazil. I've gone on Adam Murfitt's podcast. I was just on that yesterday, actually, in the UK. So it's great that we can, find more members of the community and bring everybody together, and that we have time to hang out like this and talk football, because it's going to get a lot busier very soon. It's going to be harder to find the moments to take an hour and a half to talk about this stuff. So thank you so much for having me on, and I'd be glad to do it again. And thank you again for doing it in English, because I think I would have fumbled my way through it if it was me trying to remember all my French from back in the day.
No, it was good. It was good. It was a slight Canadian accent that I could already hear, but
yeah, I've been told that. I don't know what exactly that is, but I have been told that. I was on a Denver radio station a couple weeks ago, and at the end of this, they said, "One more question: are you Canadian?" And I was like, "Oh, they didn't know." So yeah, it was my secret for a long time. I didn't tell everybody because I didn't think they'd want to take advice from a Canadian, but once I was accurate in the contest, it didn't really matter where I was from.
Exactly.
People were happy to follow my stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And for all the listeners who are still with us, I guess maybe we'll do another show this week, because we've just done a Dynasty drafts. And there's a few of the participants who wanted to talk about it. So we might do another show in French and see you soon this week and talk about what's going on in training camps. Thanks, Justin, again for your time. Eptin.
De rien, comme
enjoy the rest of your holiday, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Justin.
Thanks, guys.
Au revoir.